This is Secular Founding Period History, and my name is Tony Messina. This presentation will expose America's lost history and our personal autonomy, a paradigm shift in the history of mankind. In this rights review, we're going to look at the defining language in the actual documents that spell out our rights. This is going to be the actual writings from our founding fathers. We do have two versions of this presentation, though. One is the religious version, the other is the secular version, and we will start with the religious version now. And the Lord thy God said, they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So rights are given to us by God. Have a blessed day. Okay, this is the secular version of Rights Review, a basic explanation regarding rights by Tony Messina. This is a secular examination of source language regarding the subject of rights. Inalienable and unalienable rights. What exactly is this inalienable, unalienable rights thing all about? Ultimately, inalienable equals unalienable, and it is defined as unable to be taken away. The doctrine of inalienable rights, as you will see, begins in America with the first document to use the word inalienable, which was the 1776 Constitution of Virginia, where we find it in the body of language that we are about to review. We will see that Jefferson also used the inversion in his rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. It would not be until the final edited version of that document that the word unalienable would show up as you see it today. Okay, rights in general are all the same. The Ninth Amendment tells us that. It reads, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The words others retained in itself implies a direction that all rights are inherent, not granted to the people. They are all retained to begin with. The words certain and others provide no distinction or gravity, but rather a view that both are part of the same. All people are literally born with all rights installed. Granting rights can never happen, but on the other hand, rights in general are not the unalienable rights you have been led to believe. Rights in general can be impacted by the will of the majority, which is the unalienable right of self-determination by the will of the majority. This Ninth Amendment clause makes it clear that the rights listed in the Bill of Rights are no different than any and all other rights that are with equal gravity also inherent to the people. All rights are inherent to the people, and the people do with them for the most part as they please, just as you do every day. Some rights are exercisable, while other rights are non-exercisable, and there exists no total list of inherent rights either. Okay, what you're looking at here is an illustration of the subject of rights in America. We have two areas to think about here. One is the unalienable right of self-determination, and it's defined in the documents we're about to review. And then we have the inherent rights of anything you can do. All the things that you can do are your inherent rights, okay? You're born with them, okay? Some are exercisable, some are non-exercisable. But there is two worlds of thought to be given to the subject of rights in America, and one is the unalienable part, which is the unalienable right of self-determination, and the other part of rights has to do with your inherent rights, which is anything you can do. Okay, we're going to begin by looking at the Constitution of Virginia, May of 1776. Within it, there's a Declaration of Rights, Section 1, 2, and 3, that begins the entire document. This is Rights in the U.S. began as a Declaration of Rights in Virginia. Okay, the Constitution of Virginia, May 1776, a Declaration of Rights. 1. That all men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights, of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, namely, the enjoyment of life and liberty with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining safety, happiness, and safety. Number 2, that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people, that magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. Number 3, that government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community. Of all the various modes and forms of government, that is best which is capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety, and is most effectually secured against maladministration, and that when any government is found inadequate or contrary to these purposes, a majority of the community hath an indubitable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it in such a manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public weal. Okay, I've reduced that body of language in an outline form here. We're going to look at it. This is the Constitution of Virginia, May 1776, Declaration of Rights. Number 1, certain inherent rights, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty with the means of acquiring and possessing property and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Number 2, that magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. Number 3, of all the various modes and forms of government, that is best which is capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety. A majority of the community hath an indubitable, inalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it in such manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public weal. Okay, now we're going to look at the Declaration of Independence, July 1776. This is Jefferson's rough draft. He took that body of language and created a rough draft with it. What you're looking at here is an incredibly secular document. It's the photocopy of Jefferson's rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. It's the beginning section that we're dealing with today, talking about rights. You'll notice that in the left we have the green square caps. It's pointing out all the areas of the document that words were capitalized where they were supposed to be capitalized. Then we look at the lowercase on the right in red. We're pointing out that the existing words and the altered word creator, those words, nature and of nature's God and creator, those are all in lowercase. As it says at the bottom, what you see here, as you see it, was approved by Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin. All three of these men, each a master at writing, approved of this wording. They liked it. So this is how the actual document was composed. Here's Jefferson's rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. You'll take note first that the word inalienable has moved from the third section where Virginia had it. Jefferson moved the word to the first section, and this is how his rough draft reads. 1. That all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. 2. That to secure these ends, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the people. 3. That whenever any form of government shall become destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And now we see the final rendered version. Definition of self-determination. This is the version that you'll see in today's Declaration of Independence, the final edition. Okay, it's 1. Certain and unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 2. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. 3. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. This is, again, the final rendered definition of self-determination in the United States of America. Words that define the inalienable right of self-determination. That's the right that unalienable was attached to. It was the unalienable right of self-determination. Rights themselves are not unalienable. They're inherent, but they're not unalienable. The government can affect them, okay? But we're talking right here about what is unalienable, and it is the right of self-determination. Virginia declares it before America was ever a country, on behalf of America and on behalf of all the people that will ever come to be in America. They wrote this document. The Virginia Constitution is Declaration of Rights, Section 1. Certain inherent rights, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty with the means of acquiring, possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. 2, that magistrates are the trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. 3, a majority of the community hath an indubitable, inalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it in such manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public will. Okay? Then Jefferson takes that language, and he works on it a little bit, paraphrases some, and comes up with what we see in his rough draft. And that rough draft then is reduced and becomes this final edition on the right, Declaration of Independence, July 1776, final edition. 1, certain and unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 2, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. 3, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. This represents America's secular founding and proves that it was in Virginia that America's beginning was actually rooted. Unalienable rights, other rights. Unalienable rights are the foundational rights of self-determination. It's the key right that makes self-determination possible. That means we the people, not a corporation, have the right to determine which rights will be legal, which rights will be illegal, or which other rights can simply be ignored by the government and left alone, which are those other rights retained by the citizens as the Ninth Amendment states. Other rights are any and all itemized or individual rights that we deem conducive to our life, liberty, safety, and happiness. Some rights need to be codified, legally adopted for legal reasons, while other rights don't ever need to be adopted, and these other rights that are retained by the citizens are the very rights mentioned in the Ninth Amendment. A complete listing of rights does not exist and never will. Everything you do every day according to self-interest is a right. Everything. It's also your religion too. There is no such thing as a grand total number of the rights of man. That's utterly impossible to surmise. So forget that idea. In a Republican form of government, social flexibility through the voting booth requires a respect for the generational changes that happen by elected officials adding, changing, altering, or abolishing rights continually and perpetually over time. Each generation will decide for itself what forms of government and which laws they will live under. See Thomas Jefferson's letter, Can One Generation Bind Another? Our greatest danger is the maladministration or misuse of the prohibition and or suspension of various rights, such as gambling, alcohol, prostitution, etc. In conclusion, the concept of unalienable rights is simply the right of the citizens, generation to generation, to alter or reform government in an act respectfully and equally agreed to as a choice made by a majority of the citizens, and then there are those other countless and unenumerated, ever-evolving rights that are retained by the people and freely enjoyed and lived out every day in each citizen's daily activities and actions as they each freely come and go and do as they please. On the other hand, self-determination could lead to a situation wherein those rights can be suppressed by the government under a number of ways by temporary suspension, prohibition, etc. Thomas Jefferson to John Cartwright, 1824. Virginia, of which I am myself a native and resident, was not only the first of the states, but I believe I may say the first of the nations of the earth, which assembled its wise men peaceably together to form a fundamental constitution, to commit it to writing and place it among their archives, where everyone should be free to appeal to its text. But can they be made unchangeable? Can one generation bind another, and all others in succession forever? I think not. The Creator has made the earth for the living, not the dead. Rights and powers can only belong to persons, not to things, not to mere matter, unendowed with will. The dead are not even things. To what then are attached the rights and powers they held while in the form of men? A generation may bind itself as long as its majority continues in life. When that has disappeared, another majority is in place, holds all the rights and powers their predecessors once held, and may change their laws and institutions to suit themselves. Nothing then is unchangeable but the inherent and unalienable rights of men. Here we learn the fact about what is and what is not unalienable when it comes to rights, using religious rights as an example with the following document. In the last paragraph of this document, defining religious liberty in Virginia, Jefferson shows us that when it comes to the most important right that can exist, religious rights, they can be and are alienable depending on the legislature of each and every generation. So it's not true that individual rights, religious rights, speech rights, press rights, and etc. are untouchable and unalienable. They can't be. Otherwise, self-determination, self-control would be null and void. And just like in a country with no respect for rights, nothing would work right. Jefferson says that the will of the majority is alone unalienable. Okay, now we see in Jefferson's draft of Religious Freedom Bill, 1779 for Virginia. He says in the document, and though we well know that this assembly, elected by the people, have no power to restrain the acts of succeeding assemblies, constituted with powers equal to our own, and that therefore to declare this act to be irrevocable would be of no effect in law, yet we are free to declare, and do declare, that the rights thereby asserted are of the natural rights of mankind, and that if any act shall be hereafter passed to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such act will be an infringement of natural right. Okay, I'm going to finish up with this examination of the language by taking those two clauses I just mentioned, and we're going to condense them and show you what it's actually saying here. Number one, that all men have certain inherent rights of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot by any compact deprive or divest their posterity, namely life, liberty, safety, and happiness. 3. That government is represented as a majority of the community hath an unalienable right of self-determination to reform, alter, or abolish it in such manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public will. You cannot change your right of self-determination. If you did, the people would no longer be in control of their country. But they can change everything else under the sun with the right of self-determination. All rights in general are subject to the will of the majority, every generation. To relinquish one's right of self-determination would be akin to physical suicide. According to the rules, ultimately, in conclusion, no legislature of any generation can self-write away their unalienable right of self-determination, while any legislature of any generation can self-write the rules, laws, and form of government to suit themselves. When I talk about the paradigm shift in the history of mankind, I'm referring to this line from the previous letter of Jefferson to John Cartwright, wherein he says, Virginia, of which I am myself a native and resident, was not only the first of the states, but I believe I may say the first of the nations of the earth, which assembled its wise men peaceably together to form a fundamental constitution. And in my opinion, this is indeed a paradigm shift in the history of mankind. I had mentioned earlier that Madison had added some of this language that we're going over into the preamble of the federal Constitution, this is what it looked like. Was Madison's Amendment. So I'm going to read this to you real quick. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Be it hereby understood and established that all power is originally vested in, and consequently derived from the people, that government is instituted and ought to be exercised for the benefit of the people, which consists in the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the right of acquiring and using property, and generally of pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety, that the people have an indubitable, inalienable, and indefeasible right to reform or change their government whenever it be found adverse or inadequate to the purposes of its institution. And if you're looking for it, here it is. Jefferson literally refers to black men as men. Indisputable proof that Jefferson included black men when he said that all men are created equal can be found and realized in both the letters of Jefferson regarding black people and his literary description of them in his rough draft of the Declaration of Independence as not only men by capitalization, but they were men by all caps as seen below. This is an extract from the rough draft version of the Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson is talking about slaves, and he blatantly capitalizes all three letters of the word men, talking about slaves. Okay? There might be nothing more insulting to a slave-owning Southern gentleman than to see this direct reference to black men being real men, at the hand of Jefferson, no less. But here it is in black and white. Of course, this clause was rejected in the debates at the insistence of South Carolina and Georgia. Okay, if you want to get a sense of what really is a most important right versus a less important right, try this. Go into this exercise here and look at these listed rights, and let's pretend for the moment that you can only have 5 of them. Think of which 5 of these rights would be most important to you, and then in the comment section below, if there is one, with wherever this is posted, go down there and write your opinion of what you think are the 5 most important to you, and a comment accompanying your decision. Thank you very much, and have a good day.